Plan to tax millionaires at least 30%. It's called the Buffett Rule. At 4:30, senators will set the Buffett Rule aside and debate the nomination of West Virginia lawyer Stephanie Thacker for the Federal Appeals Court. She worked for the Justice Departments in West Virginia and Washington State, and a vote on that nomination will be held at 5:30. Also a vote on whether to move forward on the Buffett Rule. Live coverage now of the U.S. Senate.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. God of might and mercy, we lift our hearts in praise. Thank you for this day with its opportunities for courageous and noble service. Use our lawmakers this day to validate the faith of our forebears through their faithful service to you and country. As they labor, may they feel the nearness of your presence and be guided by your wisdom. Equip them to bear the responsibilities they cannot assign to others as you strengthen them for life's inevitable twists and turns. Lord, draw near to them and give them your peace. We pray in your merciful name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting our Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., April 16, 2012. To the Senate. On the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Christopher A. Coons, a senator from the state of Delaware, to perform the duties of the chair, son Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
As millions of Americans prepare to file income tax returns, the Senate will consider one of the basic unfair provisions in the tax code. Today, the wealthiest 1% takes home the highest share of the nation's income since the early 20s, the roaring 20s. But while their bank accounts have grown, their tax bills have become smaller. The wealthiest Americans now pay the lowest tax rate in more than 5 decades. The rich pay less than they have for more than 50 years. And this unfair system has turned the gap between the richest few and everyone else into a gulf, not a gap. Over the last few decades, a small number of Americans have seen their income skyrocket by almost 300%. But for the rest of Americans, wages have barely moved. They haven't kept pace with the price of a modest home, college, or, of course, a secure retirement. Times are tough for many middle-class American families, but millionaires and billionaires aren't sharing the pain or the sacrifices, not one bit. Last year, there were 7,000 millionaires who didn't pay a single penny in federal income taxes. 7,000 millionaires didn't pay a single penny in taxes. Instead, ordinary Americans footed the bill. And, Mr. President, that's not fair. In recent years, some Americans earning north of $110 million a year paid a lower tax rate than millions of middle-class families. Mr. President, that's also not fair. That's how someone like our friend Warren Buffett winds up paying a lower tax rate than his secretary, which also is not fair. When the richest few are making more than ever before, they can afford to shoulder their fair share of the burden to make this country prosper. And they shouldn't be allowed to hide behind tax loopholes that rig the system in their favor. The Paying a Fair Share Tax Act, known as the Buffett Rule, would restore fairness to a system that has favored the interests of the wealthy for far too long. This legislation would ensure Americans who earn more than $1 million a year pay at least 30% of their income in taxes. The bill would hold harmless nearly every small business in America. In fact, more than 99% of small businesses would be held harmless. It would maintain the deduction for charitable giving, and it would be a small but important step toward restoring fiscal responsibility as our nation makes difficult choices about where to spend and what to cut. 3/4 of Americans believe millionaires and billionaires should contribute more. 2/3 of millionaires say it's time to even the playing field. Yet, everyone, all Republicans except those within the Beltway, believe that's not the case. Republicans in Congress would rather end Medicare as we know it, set forth in the so-called infamous Ryan budget. They would rather slash education funding as set forth in that same infamous budget than ask the richest of the rich to contribute even a penny to make education more meaningful and to continue maintaining Medicare as we know it. As the Senate, Democrats work to make our tax system fair for all Americans. Republicans in the House continue to pursue a budget that would hand more tax breaks to the wealthiest few, the so-called Ryan budget. I just talked about it. At its heart, this important debate and the Buffett Rule is about priorities, setting priorities. America can build a world-class education system that will prepare our children and our grandchildren to compete in the industries of tomorrow. We can honor our commitment to a generation of young men and women who put their lives in line to serve and protect our freedom. And we can ensure seniors who worked hard all their lives look forward to a secure retirement and quality, affordable health care. Or we can keep protecting special tax breaks for the richest of the rich. We can't do both. We must make smart choices. President Franklin Roosevelt once said, and I quote, "In our personal ambitions, we're individualists. But in our seeking for economic and political progress as a nation, we all go up or else we all go down as one people," close quote. So I hope my Republican colleagues will join Democrats this evening as we choose a path toward economic fairness that allows all Americans to rise together as one people. Mr. President, H.R. 5 is at the desk and is due for a second reading.
The clerk will read the title of the bill for the second time.
H.R. 5, an act to improve patient access to health care services and so forth.
I would object to any further proceedings at this time for this matter, Mr. President.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President, following any
The
legal
bill will be
remarks...
placed on the calendar.
Of course, I'm sorry.
And the bill will be placed on the calendar.
Following any leader remarks, the Senate will resume consideration of the motion to proceed to S. 2240, the Paying a Fair Share Tax Act. At 4:30 today, the Senate will proceed to executive session to consider Executive Calendar number 460, Stephanie Dawn Thacker of West Virginia, to be United States Circuit Judge for the Fourth Circuit, with up to 60 minutes of a debate equally divided and controlled between Senators Leahy and Grassley or the designees. Upon the use or yielding back of that time, it will be about 5:30, there will be a roll call vote on confirmation of the Thacker nomination. There will be a second roll call vote on the motion to invoke cloture on the motion to proceed to S. 2230, the Paying a Fair Share Tax Act.
Mr. President.
The Republican leader.
Mr. President, there's one thing every American can agree on right now. It's that we've got serious challenges in this country, and the time isn't on our side. Action needs to be taken soon. Just to cite a few things, everybody's holding their breath, waiting for the federal debt to catch up with us. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Many young people are basically giving up on the American dream. Seniors and those approaching retirement are concerned about the safety and sustainability of entitlements. Working Americans and those who employ them are frustrated by the growth and the reach of government. And nearly 14 million Americans who can't find work are wondering how it got so hard to land a good-paying job in what is supposed to be the most prosperous economy on earth. Now, all of these people know we're in rough shape. They live it every day. And frankly, a lot of them have given up hope that lawmakers here in Washington are interested in doing anything at all, that would help. But the truth is, there is some good news to report out of Washington. And that's the growing bipartisan consensus not only about the existence of these problems, but also about the proper solution. Just about everybody agrees that comprehensive tax reform would help turn this economy around, strengthen entitlements, spur innovation and economic growth, and create jobs. The problem is we've got a president who seems more interested in pitting people against each other than he is in actually doing what it takes to face these challenges head on and to solve them in a bipartisan manner. And if anybody had any doubt about that, the president's relentless focus on this so-called Buffett tax over the past few weeks should have dispelled it. This entire debate has been very illuminating for a lot of folks. It's revealed a lot about this president. By wasting so much time on this political gimmick that even Democrats admit won't solve our larger problems, it's shown the president is actually more interested in misleading people than he is in leading. Now, I know that it may sound a little strong to some, but just step back and think about what's going on here. We've got a $15 trillion debt. Some call it the most predictable crisis in history. We have the largest tax increase in the history of the country looming that will hit every single American who pays income taxes in less than 9 months from today. Well, President Obama looked at the options in front of him, sat down with his political advisors and said, you know what, let's go with a poll-tested tax increase on investment and job creation that won't fix anything and won't pass anyway, instead of actually doing something about the debt and the deficit. Same thing on gas prices. The President looked at $4 a gallon gasoline and said, let's go with a poll-tested tax on energy manufacturers, which would increase the price at the pump instead of actually doing something to solve the problem. Isn't this precisely the kind of thing President Obama campaigned against in the first place? Politics as usual. But that's all we get. The worse our problems get, the less serious he becomes. The more people coalesce around a bipartisan solution, the more he focuses on something that's completely irrelevant or that has absolutely no chance of passing. We're in a crisis here. And sadly, it's all politics all the time. Somewhere along the way, this president seems to have forgotten why he was elected. For him, it's not about jobs or the economy. It's about his idea of fairness, about imposing it on others. And if we lose more jobs in the process, oh well, so be it. Just take the Buffett tax. Anytime the president proposed anything in the past, he told us how many jobs it would create, whether it was the FAA bill, the highway bill, the stimulus, you name it. Apparently those days are over. Nobody's even claiming this thing creates jobs. It's all about the president's idea of fairness now. Well, I think Americans are tired of the blame game. They want their president to solve problems, not point fingers. They think their president should spend his time working out a solution between the two parties instead of running around the country trying to distract people from his own inability to get the job done, instead of running around lecturing everybody on fairness. Now, the president is using two arguments in favor of the Buffett tax. First, he says it's a matter of fairness. And second, he thinks the government would do a better job of investing the money than the people he hopes to take it from. First, it's a matter of fairness. And second, he assumes the government would do a better job of using that money than the people he's taking it from. On the first point, I think most people have heard enough about the president's notion of fairness to know it doesn't match up with theirs. To most people, what's fair about America is that they can earn their success and expect to be rewarded for it. Nobody ever crossed an ocean or a desert to come here for the government health care. People come here because they think that everybody here has a shot at something more than that. It's a point my colleague, the junior senator from Wyoming, hit home pretty well this morning in an op-ed he wrote for Investors Business Daily. It's entitled, "Buffett Tax Divides Americans but Solves Nothing." And I would like to ask consent that that appear in the record at this point.
Without objection.
Here's some of what he wrote. This is Senator Barrasso. President Obama thinks it's fair that our children and grandchildren will be burdened with debt because of his unprecedented reckless spending. Washington borrows 42 cents of every dollar it spends. The President thinks that's fair. He thinks it's fair to pile another $40,000 of debt onto every household in the U.S. over the last 3 years. The President thinks that's fair. He thinks it's fair to use college students as props for his campaign-style rallies without explaining how his bad policies will leave them in debt. He thinks it's fair to force hardworking taxpayers to subsidize a wealthy person's purchase of a hybrid luxury car because it fits his idea for American energy. He thinks it's fair to hand out hundreds of millions of tax dollars to politically connected solar energy companies that then go bankrupt. He thinks it's fair to tell thousands of workers they won't have jobs because he blocked the Keystone XL pipeline to solidify the support of a few far-left environmentalists. And apparently, President Obama thinks it's fair that 3 years of his policies have left us with more people on food stamps, more people in poverty, lower home values, higher gas prices, and higher unemployment. Senator Barrasso then explained what he thinks Americans actually think fairness consists of: equality of opportunity, freedom for everybody to pursue their dreams without government blocking the way. For the President, fairness is about taking from some and giving to others. It's about taking from taxpayers and giving it to solar companies. It's about taking from the private economy and giving it to government workers so they can blow it on $823,000 awards dinner for themselves. It's anything but fair. As for the President's second argument, well, you tell me. What about the way government spends the money it gets from taxpayers makes anybody think they would do a better job with the money they hope to get from this tax? Does anybody seriously think the government would do a better job spending this money than the people from whom they would extract this additional tax? It's completely ludicrous. I mean, until Washington can show that it's better steward of taxpayer dollars or that it knows how to invest in a winner, it shouldn't expect people to hand over another penny. Here's my point. We've got serious problems to address, and the President is not behaving seriously. There's a need and a growing desire on both sides of the aisle to do something. The President needs to step up and provide the serious leadership he promised the American people. And our folks, the people in this country, all 306 million of them, have every right to expect something better. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved, and under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of the motion to proceed to S-2230, which the clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 339 S-2230, a bill to reduce the deficit by imposing a minimum effective tax for high-income taxpayers.
Mr. President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. On a late spring day, 27 years ago, President Ronald Reagan addressed a group of high school students in Atlanta, Georgia. Many of the students in that audience that day were about to join the workforce, and President Reagan spoke about the strange, to use his word, tax system that would soon claim a portion of their paychecks. In his speech, President Reagan pledged, "We're going to close the unproductive tax loopholes that have allowed some of the truly wealthy to avoid paying their fair share," end quote. He went on to note that under the country's complex tax rules, it was possible for millionaires to pay nothing while a bus driver pays 10% of his salary. President Reagan called this inequity, with millionaires paying lower tax rates than bus drivers, to use his word, crazy. And he said, "It's time we stopped it." 1 year later, President Reagan signed into law bipartisan tax reform that closed many of the loopholes and ensured that the highest-earning Americans paid a fair share. The 1986 tax reform deal set the tax rate on investment income, overwhelmingly earned by those at the very top of the income ladder, at the same rate as regular wage income. Unfortunately, in the years that followed, lobbyists have been all over Congress, and Congress has restored many of the loopholes that President Reagan cut, and it has repeatedly reduced the tax rates on investment income. The capital gains tax rate has gone from 28% in the bipartisan Reagan tax reform to 15% today. Once again, those at the very top of the income spectrum have opportunities to cut their tax bills that are not available to regular middle-class families. Let's look at where we are today, a quarter century after the last major overhaul of our tax system. This is a building that has a story to tell. This is the Helmsley Building on Park Avenue in New York City. This building is large enough that it has its own zip code. So we know from public IRS information gathered by zip code that the very wealthy and successful individuals and corporations that call this building their home, with an average adjusted gross income of $1.2 million each, paid on average a 14.7% total federal tax rate in the last available year that we have information for. A 14.7% total federal tax rate is less than the rate that the average New York City janitor, the average New York City doorman, or the average New York City security guard pays. The system is upside down. And it's not just in the Helmsley Building. Each year, the Internal Revenue Service publishes a report detailing the taxes paid by the highest-earning 400 Americans. Last May, the IRS published the most recent data on the top 400 taxpayers for the year 2008. Let's look how they did in that year. They had average income of $270 million each. That's not bad. In fact, that's wonderful. That's part of what makes America great. But here's the crazy part, to quote President Reagan. On average, these 400 extremely high-earning Americans, $270 million in 1 year, actually paid an average federal tax rate of just 18.2% on adjusted gross income. We've spent a fair amount of time in the Senate debating whether the top income tax rate should be 35% or something else, like 39.6% as it was in the Clinton boom years. But the ultra-rich get around this top rate through a variety of tax gimmicks. We looked at what level of income a single filer would have to make to start paying 18.2% or more in federal taxes. It is $39,350. If you look at the Department of Labor's wage levels, that's about what a truck driver on average earns in Rhode Island. $40,200 is what an average truck driver, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, earns in Rhode Island. more than the $39,350, which means that they're probably paying actually a higher tax rate as a single truck driver in Providence, Rhode Island, than a billionaire who just made $270 million in the last year. That's just not fair. That's not right. That's not the progressive tax system we've always had. I recently heard from one such truck driver in Rhode Island, Mike Nunes. Mike Nunes is a member of Teamsters Local 251, and he joined me for a roundtable discussion on tax issues in Cranston, Rhode Island. Mike said, "I've been a middle-class worker here in Rhode Island since I was in my early 20s. My wife and I pay our taxes, and it's frustrating to hear that multimillionaires are getting special treatment to pay a lower rate." Well, Mike's right, and I hear the same thing as I travel around Rhode Island. I know that my colleagues hear the same thing as they meet with their constituents across the country. They all agree with President Reagan that a tax system that allows many of the highest income among us to pay less than a truck driver must be fixed. The problem goes beyond the top 400 income earners in the country. The Congressional Research Service confirms that roughly 1/4 of million-dollar-plus earners, about 94,500 taxpayers, pay a lower effective tax rate than over 10 million moderate income taxpayers. Reuters recently reported this: taxpayers earning more than $1 million a year pay an average U.S. income tax rate of nearly 19%. And the story goes on, about 65% of taxpayers who earn more than $1 million face a lower tax rate than the median tax rate for moderate income earners making $100,000 or less a year. Let me say that again. About 65% of taxpayers who earn more than $1 million face a lower tax rate than the median tax rate for moderate income earners making $100,000 or less a year. Our tax system is supposed to be progressive. The more you earn, the higher the rate you pay. That's not class warfare, that's tax policy, and it's been that way for decades, if not generations. We undermine that principle when we allow the highest income Americans to pay a lower tax rate than the package truck driver delivering packages to their door pays. It's no wonder that so many of the Rhode Islanders with whom I've spoken have lost confidence that our tax system gives them a straight deal. With the top 1% of Americans earning 23% of our nation's income, the top 1% of Americans earning 23% of our nation's income and controlling 34%, more than a third, of our nation's wealth, it would be difficult to argue that our system is too progressive. Let's look at this other graphic. Of all of our nation's wealth, the top 5% of Americans own over 60% of it. Of all of our nation's wealth, the top 5% own more than 60% of all the wealth in the country. The top 1% control over a third of it, and the 400 families at the very top, the 400 I talked about earlier, own almost 3% of all America's wealth just among those 400 families. These are proportions we have not seen since the Roaring '20s, and they're getting steadily worse. Now, we're not going to overhaul the nation's tax laws this evening, but in a few hours we will have a chance to advance legislation to restore some fairness into our tax system. This long overdue bill, the Paying a Fair Share Act of 2012, would implement the so-called Buffett Rule, after Warren Buffett, who's famously lamented that he pays a lower tax rate than his secretary does. To correct this glaring tax inequity, this bill would ensure that those at the very top pay at least the tax rates faced by middle-class families. I want to thank Senators Akaka, Begich, Leahy, Harkin, Blumenthal, Sanders, Schumer, Reed of Rhode Island, Rockefeller, Franken, Boxer, Durbin, and Levin for co-sponsoring this measure, and I would ask unanimous consent to add Senator Lautenberg as an additional co-sponsor.
Without objection.
The structure of the bill is pretty simple. If your total income, capital gains included, is over $2 million, you calculate your taxes under the regular system. And if your effective rate turns out to be greater than 30%, you pay that rate. If, on the other hand, your effective tax rate is below 30%, like the 11% tax rate Warren Buffett paid in 2010, then you'd pay the fair share tax of 30% instead. Taxpayers earning less than $1 million, which is more than 99.8% of Americans, would not be affected by the bill at all. For taxpayers earning between $1 million and $2 million, the fair share tax gets gradually phased in, so that ultimately, when you earn over $2 million, you're subject to the full 30% minimum rate. The one exception the bill makes to the 30% minimum is to maintain the incentive for charitable giving. Under the bill, taxpayers are permitted to subtract the same amount of contributions allowed under the regular income tax from their taxable income. The reason for this one exception should be self-evident. Charity benefits others, and taxpayers should be encouraged to give. Some say that given our fragile economic recovery, now is the wrong time to raise taxes on anyone. While middle-class families continue to struggle through the recovery, it seems the boom times have already returned for those at the very top. According to a recent analysis by University of California at Berkeley economist Emmanuel Saez, 93% of the income growth in 2010 went to the top 1% of income earners. 93% of the income growth went to the top 1% of income earners. Even more astounding, 37% of the income growth in that year went to the few thousand taxpayers in the top 0.01%. With so much income growth at the very top, and with looming budget deficits, it is hard to argue that people with 7 or 8 or 9 or even 10-figure incomes can't afford to pay a reasonable tax rate. And just to be clear, it's been said on this floor that this is a tax on investment and that this is a tax on job creation. That is wrong. This is a tax on one thing: income. Republicans have criticized the amount of revenue that would be generated by the bill. The ranking Republican on the Senate Finance Committee called the $47 billion that the Joint Committee on Taxation has estimated a meager sum. Well, in Rhode Island, we don't consider $47 billion to be a meager sum. It's enough money, for instance, to permanently keep subsidized student loan interest rates from jumping from the current 3.4% to 6.8% in July, which they will do unless we act. If we could use this bill to offset the cost of keeping student loan interest rates low, then there are millions of students out there who would call that benefit something other than meager. We could use the $47 billion on badly needed infrastructure projects and create 611,000 jobs nationwide. In Rhode Island, we have 11% unemployment and a long backlog of transportation infrastructure projects. At the top of that list is the Viaduct Bridge on Interstate 95 through Providence. This critical link on the Northeast Corridor running up through Rhode Island has wooden boards inserted between the I-beams underneath to prevent the concrete in the roadway from falling in on the traffic below. And also where the Amtrak rails go underneath, there are wood planks to keep the roadway from falling in on the trains as they pass below. I don't think repair of this bridge and others would be meager at $47 billion worth, particularly if we put it into an infrastructure bank and leveraged it for even more jobs. It's worth noting that this legislation would generate far more revenue than the $47 billion the Republicans complain of if the Republicans were to succeed in their quest to extend the very high-end Bush tax cuts. If the Bush tax cuts for people in this bracket continue, the revenue from the bill jumps from $47 billion to $162 billion over a 10-year budget horizon. Operating as a backstop, the Buffett Rule can ensure that those at the top pay a fair share no matter what loopholes, no matter what special treatments Congress adds to the tax code in the future. Finally, the Senate Republican leader has described the bill as yet another proposal from the White House that won't create a single job or lower the price at the pump by a penny. Well, the Minority Leader is absolutely right that the aim of this bill is not to lower the unemployment rate or the price of gasoline. However, if you put the $47 billion in revenue into infrastructure, you could create 611,000 infrastructure jobs and a lot of good infrastructure as well. And if you put the $47 billion into LIHEAP, you could help millions of Americans pay their energy bills. But let me add an additional point. The Republicans are claiming that this bill, which is a tax fairness bill, not a job-creating bill, will not create a single job. Of course, if you spent the revenue, it would, but that's a separate discussion. At the same time that they're making that point, the Republicans in Washington are sitting on our highway bill, which creates 3 million jobs. And they won't call it up on the House side because they don't want to rely on Democrat votes. 3 million jobs are waiting action in the House on the bipartisan Senate highway bill that had 75 senators supporting it, and they won't call it up, the Republicans won't call it up because they don't want to use Democrat votes? What kind of Washington insider logic is that? The people across this country who will go to work on those roads and bridges don't think that makes any sense. And for the Republicans now to be talking about jobs on this bill, while they have a 3 million jobs bill that they are blockading in the House, the word jobs should turn to ashes in their mouths. There are plenty of things that this narrow fairness bill won't do. It will not bring world peace. It won't save endangered whales from extinction. It won't cure the common cold. It will do none of those things. It will restore the confidence of middle-class Americans in our tax system by assuring that those at the very top of the income spectrum aren't paying lower rates than regular families do. In addition to restoring fairness to the tax code, the bill will generate considerable revenue to cut the deficit or invest in job creation and critical programs. I happen to think that tax fairness and tens of billions of dollars in revenue or in deficit reduction are reasons enough to pass the bill. And if the Republican leader would like to work with us on tackling other issues, I'm wide open to that. But today's vote is about tax fairness. It's about undoing a gimmick in the tax code that allows people earning over $250 million a year to pay lower tax rates than truck drivers. Unfortunately, this has become a partisan issue, which is really surprising, because the principle of a progressive tax code has always been a basic American tax policy principle, and the arguments we're making today about paying a fair share were made exactly by Ronald Reagan. But things have changed, and so there is this squabble. Even business owners support this bill. A recent poll conducted by the American Sustainable Business Council, the Main Street Alliance, and the Small Business Majority found that 58% of business owners said that those making over $1 million a year are not paying their fair share in taxes. And 57% supported increasing taxes for those at the top. That's out of the small business community. These business owners know that it's simply fair for the most fortunate and successful Americans to pay a larger share of their income in taxes than less successful families do. That's what a progressive tax system is supposed to do. That's what it has always done. Sadly, over the past few decades, as income has soared at the very top, the effective tax rates have plummeted. This chart, prepared by Budget Chairman Kent Conrad, shows the effective federal income tax rate for the top 400 income earners since 1992. As you can see, there has been a dramatic drop from 1995 to 2008. These rates are for federal income tax. If you add in the small amount of payroll taxes paid by those at the very top, which is a separate discussion, but they fall 100% on the income of middle-income families, but only on a small portion of the income of super high-end families. The total federal tax rate for 2008 goes up to 18.2%, counting in that withholding. And that is, again, the effective federal tax rate of that truck driver in Providence. The trend in falling tax rates for those making 7 figures in income or more has eroded the confidence of ordinary Americans who do pay their fair share. I'll conclude with one more quote. This is another quote from President Reagan's 1985 speech on tax fairness. President Reagan, the man whom so many conservative Republicans revere, said, quote, "What we're trying to move against is institutionalized unfairness. We want to see that everyone pays their fair share and no one gets a free ride. Our reasons? It's good for society when we all know that no one is manipulating the system to their advantage because they're rich and powerful." That is President Reagan in 1985. Today, his party is defending that manipulation. In the 27 years since that speech, the American playing field has been skewed ever more towards the rich and the powerful. From bankruptcy reform that favors big corporations over people, to the Citizens United decision, which has allowed corporations and billionaires to spend unlimited cash to influence American elections, to this lower tax rate for ultra-high income earners, the American people have simply not been getting a straight deal from Washington. Many are calling the vote we will have on the Buffett Rule bill today a test vote because it's on a procedural motion and the pundits don't expect it to pass. I agree. This is a test vote, but it's a test of a different sort. This is a test of Washington, D.C., to do something that is simple, to do something that is right, and to do something that is fair for the middle class. If we proceed to and pass this bill, it will show the American people that Congress is capable of standing by their side, that Congress is capable of being on their side, that Congress is capable of saying no to a powerful and well-funded special interest. If we fail, it will indicate exactly what President Reagan feared, that the rich and powerful are able to manipulate the system to their advantage, and we in Congress will do nothing about it. One of the things that America stands for in this world is that we are fair with each other. We get a straight deal, and we give each other a straight deal. That is one of the ways in which America stands as an example in the rest of the world. There are plenty of countries whose internal political and economic systems amount to a racket that is rigged for the benefit of the rich and powerful and against farmers and workers and small businesses and ordinary families. Some of those countries are so bad we call them kleptocracies. But that has never been America. That is not the America of the Founding Fathers. It is not the America of Ronald Reagan. It is not the America that shines its light into the four corners of the world as an example to the rest of the world. That is not the America that we are here to serve. We must be vigilant in protecting the ideals that make this country what it is. I urge my colleagues, Democrats and Republicans alike, to heed President Reagan's words and to support this legislation, which will ensure that a favored segment of the highest-earning Americans once again do something as simple as pay their fair share in taxes. Let us show the American people that our nation really does stand apart as an exemplar of fairness and of equal opportunity and of equal responsibility under the law. I thank the Chair. I see colleagues on the floor, and I yield.
Senator from Ohio.
Mr. President, we stand here today, the day before Tax Day, the day when all Americans have to get their income taxes together. And we also stand here in the middle of the weakest economic recovery since the Great Depression, a time when economists across the spectrum agree there is an urgent need for us to take our tax code and make it more efficient, to reform our tax code to help grow our economy and add jobs. And instead of an administration or leadership in this body proposing serious tax reforms that will actually get people back to work, we're spending this week debating a political proposal that no one can credibly argue will create a single job, except maybe some tax accountants, because it adds more complexity to an already way too complex tax code. Unfortunately, this has become tax gimmick week here in Washington. It's particularly disappointing because as a nation, we are stuck in an historically weak recovery with high unemployment, record long-term unemployment, and anemic economic growth. This recovery we're in is different, sadly. We're still millions of jobs down from where we were at the start of the recession, which was about 4 years ago. Interesting to compare it to other recoveries. In 2001, the so-called jobless recovery, at this point in the recovery, about 4 years after the recession, the nation had not only brought back all the jobs that were lost in the recession, but we had added hundreds of thousands of new jobs. Even in 1981, considered the deepest recession in modern history before the most recent one, at this time, 4 years after the recession, we had added 6 million new jobs to the economy. Unfortunately, today, as we stand here, we're still down 5.5 million jobs. So instead of adding 6 million jobs, as we had during the Reagan administration, after the 1981 deep recession, today, as we stand here, we are still trying to find how to add back the jobs we lost in the recession. 5.5 million jobs, 5.5 million families across this country who continue to look for hope and opportunity. So in the midst of this weak recovery, the weakest since the Great Depression, I think it's reasonable to expect that the President of the United States and the United States Congress would focus on real solutions to create jobs. In particular, real solutions to reform our inefficient, complex, and outdated tax code, because there's a consensus out there we need to do that. To make the tax code more pro-jobs, to encourage work and savings and investment requires broad-based reform, and everybody knows it. The President's own commission, called the Simpson-Bowles Commission, recommended it. Most recently, the President's own Jobs Council recommended it. Mr. President, we need a proposal taken up by this United States Senate that's driven by good economics. And instead, what we're getting this week is one that's driven by campaign rhetoric. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle will soon bring to the floor President Obama's proposed new tax targeting investment income. Now, the Buffett tax is named after businessman Warren Buffett. It imposes a 30% minimum tax on anyone earning over a certain amount, $1 million. Interestingly, for all the chest-thumping about this is going to reduce our deficit, this new tax will bring in less than 0.5%, less than 0.5% of the annual individual income tax that are paid. By the way, this will be enough to pay 1 week's interest on our $15 trillion national debt. That's it. So it's certainly not about deficit reduction at a time of trillion-dollar deficits. The President also says this new tax on investments in American businesses is necessary to, as he said, invest in the things that will help the economy grow. This apparently means this will result in more government spending. Private enterprises that actually create jobs apparently are not one of those things that will be making the investments. Instead, it will be investments through government spending. I just think the Buffett Rule is bad economics. I think it's bad fiscal policy. And I think it's a distraction from the broader bipartisan effort underway to achieve fundamental tax reform that is necessary to unleash a true economic recovery. The proposal is built, by the way, on this notion that I heard from my colleague a moment ago that the tax code is not progressive. We can argue about what progressive means, but here are some statistics. According to the Tax Policy Center, the top 1% of wage earners in this country, income earners, pay a 28% federal tax rate. By contrast, Americans with incomes between $60,000 and $100,000 pay a 19% tax rate. Those earning between $35,000 and $60,000 pay a 14% tax rate. Another way to look at this is that the top 1% of taxpayers now pay 39% of all federal income taxes. The top 10% now pay 86% of all federal income taxes. And those below the 50% mark now pay 1% of federal income taxes. Is that progressive or not? I would say that it is progressive. So to my colleagues who are saying the income tax is not progressive, I don't think that's the concern here. I think the concern is we have an income tax code that has too many preferences, deductions, credits, exemptions. By the way, mostly taken advantage of by wealthier taxpayers. We ought to reform the tax code. But because the tax code is already so progressive, as we talked about, this proposal from the President works primarily by increasing the tax a lot of wealthy people pay on investment income, primarily investment income, what's known as long-term capital gains. Capital gains have historically been taxed in this country at a lower rate for individuals, and they're taxed at a lower rate for good reason. Capital gains are the return on longer-term investments in enterprises that create jobs, and that's something we've always wanted to encourage in this country. A lower tax on capital gains drives job-creating investment, and according to the nonpartisan Congressional Committee on Taxation, it increases wages over the long run. So by having a lower rate for capital investments, long-term investments in job creation, it will increase wages in the long run. By the way, that's why Presidents Kennedy, Reagan, Clinton, and Bush all backed capital gains rates cuts. As President Kennedy said so well, a rising tide lifts all boats. Second, we should realize that raising the capital gains rate doesn't translate directly into higher revenues. Why is that? It's because it's an elective tax. Think about it. You only pay it when you choose to sell an asset, when you choose to realize what's called a gain, when you sell something. So you don't have to incur this tax. Common sense, economics, and experience teach that a higher capital gains rate causes some investors to hold assets rather than sell them, just as a lower capital gains rate will encourage more people to sell an asset because the rate will be lower. And this is what's happened. After every recent capital gains rate cut in 1981, 1997, and 2003, capital gains revenues actually increased. So you had a cut in the rate in 81, 87, and 2003, and what happened? The revenues actually increased. Lower rate, higher revenues. How could that be? Well, because with the lower rate, people sold more assets. It created more economic activity. Capital gains tax rates increased by between 37 and 114% over 4 years, and that's after inflation. By contrast, after a capital gains rate increase took effect in 1987, that was just talked about a moment ago, capital gains revenues actually dropped 55% over the next 4 years. So we can debate about what the rate ought to be, but the fact is to say that there's going to be a direct correlation between raising that rate and more revenue simply is not borne out by historical experience or by common sense. Third, unlike other types of income, capital gains are often double taxed. Think about a typical capital investment, someone buying corporate stock. Now, that's the most typical one. Holding that stock for over a year, you've got to hold it for over a year, then selling it for a profit. That gain has already been subject to a 35% rate at the corporate level. It's then followed by the capital gains rate, now at 15%, when the shareholder sells, for a combined 45% tax on that capital investment. By the way, with global competitors like Canada, Japan, the United Kingdom, and others moving to cut their corporate tax rates in order to attract jobs, this new tax on capital investment would move the United States further backwards in terms of being competitive in the global economy. Our corporate tax rate is already higher than all of our major foreign competitors. As of April 1st, Japan lowered theirs, making us #1 in the world, and something you don't want to be #1 in, which is the highest corporate rate. We don't need new barriers to growth and job creation, and that's what would result. Instead of an election year gimmick that won't help the economy, it's time to focus on fundamental tax reform to make American businesses and workers more competitive. Again, as the President's own Simpson-Bowles Commission has recommended, as the President's own Jobs Council has recommended. I agree with what former Clinton Budget Director Alice Rivlin said about the Buffett tax, which is that the way to fix the tax code is to fix the tax code, not to add another complication at the margins. The Buffett tax is an election year distraction from serious reform. Why not focus on the elephant in the room, an outdated and complex tax code that is hurting our economy, weighing down our economy, making it harder for us to get out of the kind of doldrums we're in right now with this weak recovery. I believe there's a consensus among economists and serious thinkers across the political spectrum, Republicans, Democrats, independents alike, that in an increasingly competitive global economy, we have to reform our tax code to help us get out of this rut we're in, this historically weak recovery that leaves too many people vulnerable, too many parents wondering if the future is going to be brighter for their kids and grandkids as it was for them. I believe there's also a growing bipartisan consensus about how to do it, which is that we ought to do it by broadening the base, meaning getting rid of some of these growing credits and deductions and exemptions I talked about earlier, lowering the marginal rates on American families and on our businesses to be able to create jobs. That will ensure that those who can afford to pay more will pay their share, their fair share, and the economy will grow, rising tide, lifting all boats, truly helping families who are worried, for good reason, about their economic future. Mr. President, the American people don't deserve more gimmicks, as we'll see this week in Washington. They deserve real leadership. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President,
While we are waiting for the next senator to arrive and be recognized, I just wanted to respond to a couple of the statements that have been made recently on the floor. It's interesting that my Republican colleagues tend to refer to this as a tax gimmick. It was referred to as Tax Gimmick Week because we're considering having people earning $250 million pay a rate equal to what a truck driver pays. That doesn't sound very gimmicky to me. That sounds like pretty Main Street fairness to me. But the bottom line is that there is a gimmick at stake. It's the gimmick in the tax code that allows for that to take place, that allows for a hedge fund billionaire to claim a lower rate than a truck driver. So if there's a gimmick here, it's the gimmick that we're trying to remove. It's not a gimmick that we're trying to pursue. It's been said that this is a tax on investment, a tax on job creation. It just isn't. It's a tax on income when it's declared as income. And if our purpose should be how to add back the jobs lost in the recession, we just passed a highway bill with 75 senators supporting it, only 22 opposed, which, as we know around here in this partisan environment, is a landslide. It came out of the Environment and Public Works Committee unanimously. It had 40 amendments accepted, and now 3 million jobs are bottled up on the other end of this hallway in the House of Representatives because the Republican Speaker doesn't want to use Democratic votes. If you want to do something about jobs, tell the Republican Speaker to pass the Senate highway bill. It's as simple as that. 3 million jobs, bipartisan. So when we talk about jobs, I've got a really good recommendation. Pass the big highway jobs bill that's being kept bottled up here. Senator Harkin, do you seek recognition now?
In a few minutes.
The other point that I wanted to make on the question of whether the tax system is really progressive or not, the IRS and the Federal Reserve point out that for the top 1% in America, the top 1% who, in terms of wealth, control 33.8% of the nation's wealth. But the top 1% in taxes pay only 28.3% of the taxes when all taxes are taken into consideration. The top 5% control 60% of the nation's wealth. But the top 5% in taxes only pay 44.7%. So if you want to take numbers sort of without context, you can make it look as if it's very progressive. But when you measure against the wealth inequality in this country and the income inequality in this country, it's hard to say that we actually are running a progressive tax system. And that is why, as Reuters reported, about 65% of taxpayers who earn more than $1 million face a lower tax rate than the median tax rate for moderate income earners making $100,000 or less a year, according to the Congressional Research Service.
Mr. President.
Iowa.
Mr. President, first, I ask unanimous consent that Maria Worthen, Brendan Eigelhart, and Andrea